This is Marie Sukers, and it is the 13th of December, D-Day, for the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act consultation period on clauses 4 and 5. The President, when he signed the legislation into law, of course, gave a 3-month period for consultation with civil organizations, AfriForum and Solidariteit. Now, I want to reflect on our memorandum that we handed to the Basic Education Department, the Minister, Siviwe Gwarube, and to the Presidency this week. I will be also making some commentary on the noise that has been, that reached a crescendo this week, with so many voices like Mr. Lesufi, Blades Mande, the ANC Alliance partners, making commentary around their pronouncements on what they refer to as a liberation, that the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act's enactment is Liberation Day. You know, when I say that, I almost feel bile coming up my throat, because we are 30 years into democracy. The African National Congress, together with their alliance partners, have been in the power seat for 30 years. Just remember that. So when you see somebody jumping up and down and screaming freedom and liberty and liberation and redress, just remember that these people have been 30 years in power for them to bring about transformation in line with our constitution, in which the right of every single South African, regardless of color, creed, or cultural background, is protected and should be respected. I'll say more about that. I really do not. I'm trying to get myself not to rant. I'm so angry that I would really go on a rant that would serve nobody any purpose other than that I would be letting off steam. So I would be commenting on that and take you through the memorandum as well. This is going to be a long video. We are going to cut some of it up, and we will be sending it to our various WhatsApp groups, especially the points that we believe are very important to address. Now, the BELA Act has become a political football, I've said that. And in the noise around redress, clauses 4 and 5, particularly becoming the focal point of discussion politically in the media, with academics and NGOs speaking on this, what is really lost on people is that the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act does not speak to the crises that we are having in education. And it's a crisis that has been amplified over the last couple of years by experts in education, teachers, activists, and we see it in our economy. Now, I come from a recruitment background. I have done recruitment at all levels of organizations, entry-level positions in administration up until executive positions in my later years when I ran a boutique recruitment company. One of the things that we encountered, specifically after, as companies adopted a very aggressive approach in terms of BEE, and as part of their organizational goals to transform their organizations, not just because of legislation, but because I really met people at all levels of organizations, specifically in human resources, that had a heart for transforming their organizations and getting young people particularly into roles that will change their lives. And in many of these big organizations, many of whom, I should add, has now moved their manufacturing to other countries because it is less regulatory, and it is much cheaper for them to do business. Many of them has left our country, and with it, hundreds, thousands of jobs, of course, is on the cutting floor. They had programs where we bring young people in after they finish and graduated with a degree. they would become part of what is called an internship for 3 years. These kids then would be, before you get into an internship, they would be assessed. They would be assessed on their verbal skills, numerical skills, and abstract reasoning skills. And children that came out of the public, specifically the public schooling system, failed dismally, especially when it came to numeracy and abstract reasoning. And so much so that we had several discussions with clients around how are we going to get the right talent for them to fast track on a management path for 3 years. And many of these positions is transformative, that once a young person enters an organization like your British American Tobacco at the time, or your South African breweries, once they enter these organizations, it changes economically the prospect of their life. Going on these programs, many of them today are executives that I recruited and brought onto these programs. But we had a problem. And I'm talking about 10, 15 years ago. We had a problem with not getting students who passed the psychometric assessments. So when I speak to you about that, that is at the heart of economic growth, development, getting people out of poverty. So when we speak about education and the outcomes of education and quality education, ultimately we are speaking about changing somebody's life where they can get out of a place of dependency on the state to a place of where they can have a career and work themselves out of poverty to the place where you can own your own house, where you're not waiting on government to give you that house. So the education system and the failure of it has a direct correlation to the high level of grant dependence that we see in our country, the fact that we are having so many kids falling out of the education system, never integrating into a different form of education. The failure of the system has a material impact on the realization and the realization of the dreams of a new South Africa and what democracy truly means, that people can see democracy work. Many people never, ever in my community feel that democracy meant something for them. And it's reflected in the 11 million South Africans that just did not bother to vote because they do not see democracy work for them. But they don't see democracy work for them because of a failure by the political class to pursue policies that actually would bring the kind of transformation we need, which is not based on race, but based on the social transformation, community transformation, and the total transformation of people living in poverty, regardless of their class or the color of their skin. We are 30 years into this game, 30 years into democracy. And today we are seeing a total failure of leadership, especially when you listen to how the discourse has been run around the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act. The only question we should ask is whether it addresses the crises we see, whether children finishing school will be able to get into gainful employment, whether they can write, read, and count arithmetic, whether they can actually get into an entry-level position, apply themselves, and gain the skills they need if they're not going to university, for them to become economically viable and be able to buy your own house, have your own car, look after your own family and not be government dependent. That should be the question. The question should be, does BELA speak to the crises? Does it speak to the structural unemployment challenge we have in the country? Meaning, will children finish school and university and walk into critical skills jobs that the economy needs? That should be the question. And I am putting it to you, It does not. Mr. Blade Nzimande, SATU leaders, Mr. Lesufi can jump up and down on a platform and shout and scream liberation all he wants. Liberation for people means that I can put food on my table, that I'm able to have a job that will add to the dignity, my dignity as a human being, that will transform my life in such a way that I'm able to make economic decisions that will improve my life and that of my children. That is true liberation. Liberation is not about race. We are past that. In 1994, we crossed the Rubicon where that is concerned. And for any political leader to still today use race as the barometer for transformation and change means that they are manipulative. They are using race and divisiveness to remain in power and to remain relevant. That is my commentary. Now, this is a bit of a long-form video. We are making it available, of course, on YouTube, but I really need to speak through some of these things. It's maybe personal, it's cathartic, but I think it's important for South Africans to really hear, hopefully, hear your concerns reflected, and also to hear the counter against what is happening with the political class using legislation as a football, and legislation that has to do with the future of our children. Now let's talk about what the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act is not. It is not a solution, I've said that. It is an administrative act. What does it mean? And let me park quickly there and say, if you don't believe me, you should certainly believe them, the proponents of this legislation, because the Deputy Minister, she said at the signing of the BELA Act, it's an administrative act. So what you're actually getting, it means that it is more administrators, bureaucrats. We're actually going to have more warm bodies in seats in the department. So you will have a bigger government or bigger education department, and that money will be salaried rather than to the ground where it's needed the most. Now let's talk about what the problems are on the ground. Before I start there, I want to speak, because our memorandum picks up on what the BELA Act is not. In our memorandum that we handed over to the presidency, we handed over the memorandum this Wednesday, the 11th of December, and at the protest 2 weeks ago, we handed the memorandum over to the ministry, to the Minister of Basic Education. The key points that we highlight are the very things that I'm discussing in this video. One, that the BELA Act does not address the crisis in education and that we need education reform urgently. Now, I want to go to the place where the president signed the act and then he put clauses 4 and 5 on hold. So I want to talk around the process of BELA. When it went through all two houses of Parliament, the National Assembly, I served on the Portfolio Committee Basic Education, so I have first-hand knowledge of how this legislation went through the National Assembly, and then through the National Council of Provinces after the NA process was completed. Many of our homeschoolers, particularly, would know how this legislation was barreled through, how many of the procedural mistakes were made with this legislation and in the public participation process, because this is one of the key things that we also highlight in the memorandum. We are highlighting the fact that, 1, we need education reform. 2, that the BELA Act, as it went through the lawmaking process, there's several principles that has been violated by the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. One of the things, as an example, is that when people came to the public hearings, they had no knowledge of why or what is in the BELA Act. Many of them expressed that on camera, and you can even hear some of it on YouTube if they have not removed it. That people said, I've just received this bill today. I don't even know what is in it, but you are expecting me to comment on it. It's one of the things that we also highlighted to the president in my first correspondence to him before he signed the act, that the whole public participation process was ineffective, that meaningful engagement by the committee with what has been said by the public has not taken place. One of the things being that we did not have a comprehensive matrix where all these submissions and inputs from the public were in a comprehensive document for the committee to consider the voices of the people and to engage with it. So in the memorandum, we highlight to the president that. Now, why do I mention this? Because we need to address the noise around the BELA Act. One of them being that I heard an NGO, and I'm not going to give their name, say that for the sake of democracy, the BELA Act must be enacted. For the sake of democracy, the voices of the thousands of South Africans who rejected this legislation and gave their reasons, their voices for the sake of democracy should be adhered to and listened to. It is startling to me that we have pundits, we have academia telling parents and community leaders that the reason they're rejecting this is because of misinformation. Well, if they're rejecting it because of misinformation, it means that there was no proper and effective education process around the legislation. And that again then proves that no, you did not engage in what is fundamental in terms of an effective public participation process, which is to actually educate people and make them aware of what is in the legislation. And giving the Department of Basic Education 10 minutes or an hour to speak on the day of the public hearing on the legislation does not make effective public participation at all. It makes a joke of it makes a joke of our democratic principle of participatory democracy. It makes a joke of the very officials who are getting millions of rands in a salary, and for them to not adhere to the most basic principle or fundamentals of their job when it comes to legislation, when they don't do it, and then to barrel it through with the political muscle of what was then the African National Congress is wrong. And then you can't speak about democratic respect for the democracy or that democratic principles be adhered to, because it was not adhered to here. It was not. This legislation, if taken to court, and I do hope, and I'm asking especially everyone who supports me to support those organizations who will take it to court. Why? Because one of the key reasons that the public participation process was flawed. Now, when it comes to the 3-month period that is coming to an end today, and I don't know if you saw, but in the newspaper this morning, I read that Satu said to the president, gave him an ultimatum that today is D-Day and clauses 4 and 5 needs to be enacted. Clauses 4 and 5 needs to be enacted, and the bill should be implemented immediately today. Now, I want to speak about the issue of this 3-month consultation period. En ek gaan van dit praat in Afrikaans, want dit is belangrik. Want clausules 4 en 5 natuurlijk deel met taalbeleid en skooltoelating. En die hele debat het gefokus rondom Afrikaans. Juis omdat toe die president praat oor die toegewing wat hy maak vir 3 maande, het hy gesê vir AfriForum en AfriForum in solidariteit en vir hulle om op te kom met 'n antwoord rondom die uitdagings van hierdie 2 clausules. Wat die president gedoen het, is verkeerd. AfriForum in solidariteit, om dit te beperk tot hulle, is heeltemal verkeerd, want Nommer 1, die Basic Education Laws Amendment Act, of die wetgewing, die BELA wetgewing, was nie net verwerp op die basis van clausules 4 en 5 nie. Dit was breër. Daar is verskeie clausules in hierdie wetgewing wat problematies is en in fact onconstitutioneel. Clausule 25 van wat toe die bil was, waar jy klein skole toemaak. Sonder rede, die MEC kan die skole toemaak en as dit minder as 135 is in primêr en 200, minder as 200 as dit hoërskole is. So, die eerste probleem is dat die president het toegewing gemaak op clausules 4 en 5 op die basis van wat hy genoem het, die gesprekke wat hy gevoer het met John Steenhuisen die oggend en dat hy John Steenhuisen om daarop patent gemaak het om net met AfriForum en Solidariteit te praat rondom hierdie clausules. So die stemme van die duisende Suid-Afrikaners buite AfriForum en Solidariteit het dan nou niks beteken nie. Al die huidige partye wat in die parlement verteenwoordig word, het as deel van hulle manifesto kwaliteit onderwys gehad. Ek kan jou dit verseker. Baie van hulle het kwaliteit onderwys as deel van hulle manifesto gehad. Maar ons het 'n absolute stilte gehad toe die president smeer net fokus op clausules 4 en 5 en soveel van hierdie organisasies of politieke partye was teen die BELA wetgewing met die Demokratiese Alliansie ingesluit en nie net op die basis van clausules 4 en 5 nie. Dit was rondom die hele wetgewing omdat dit nie praat tot die krisis wat ons ervaar nie. Dit deel nie met die infrastruktuurprobleme nie, die oorvol skole nie, dit deel glad nie met die feit dat ons kinders verloor in hulle laat primêre fase, veral in ons weerlose gemeenskappe nie. So dit is nie net, die wetgewing is nie net verwerp op grond van clausules 4 en 5 nie, maar hier lê die groot probleem. Die president deel met taalbeleid veral Afrikaanse skole, die impak op Afrikaanse skole, met twee belanghebbendes. Dit is nou AfriForum en Solidariteit. Maar hy ignoreer heeltemal die kleerling-kooi gemeenskap, my gemeenskap, in daardie gesprekke. 75,8% van die kleerling-kooi gemeenskap praat Afrikaans en sien Afrikaans as hulle moedertaal. Nou, wanneer ons praat oor gelykheid en inklusiwiteit, dan moet ons praat rondom kultuurgroepe wat almal se regte beskerm en bevorder moet word. En die kleerlinggemeenskap vir die laaste 20-30 jaar voel asof hulle nog steeds 'n bywoner is in hulle eie land. Hulle voel uitgesluit. Ons mense voel uitgesluit. Hulle voel hulle belange word nie in die hart, op die hart gedra nie, van hierdie regering nie. En nou met die stilte van al die politieke partye rondom die president se exclusion of my community, there was no noise made around it. And even parties that campaigned on the colored vote, who made the colored vote the basis of their campaigns and said that the very existence or reason for their existence is to represent the colored voice, because they're serving in the GNU, was just completely quiet. It is absolutely lost on me, I promise you. Die minister van sport, kuns en kultuur, Guyton McKenzie, presies hierdie man het op hierdie mandaat na die parlement gegaan, maar totale stilte, toe jou eie mense van die tafel weggeneem is. I should say that to exclude the colored community who are impacted by this clauses 4 and 5, language and admission, to exclude them is wrong. It is wrong. I don't have a word for it because it brings the bile up in my throat again. It brings the bile up in my throat because when Lesotho dances on stage and speaks of liberation, and Mr. Blade Nzimande speaks of integration, racial integration, how dare you speak on these things when you are taking a whole group of people and taking their right to language away from them, and you're not engaging them on it? When every opportunity that you have, you are blaming white people in the name of racism, but when it comes to the colored Khoi community, you can just disregard their rights. It is absolutely hypocritical to the highest level. It is vomit-inducing to think that people go into parliament on the back of the colored vote and then you can forget about them. You can just not push their interest. Now let me tell you what the impact is. En ek gaan dit in Afrikaans sê. In ons Afrikaanse, ons kleerlingkooi gemeenskap, ons weerlose gemeenskappe, word die meeste geraak deur die toemaak van die klein skole op die platteland. Die skole wat minder as 135 is en minder as 200 in hoërskool. Dit is meerderheid Afrikaans, histories Afrikaans moedertaalskole, né? Hierdie skole word gaan Samir onder hierdie wetgewing toegemaak word. I cannot get it. I cannot fathom this. That the ANC gets away with this, that they get away with this in the name of racism, in the name of transformation, in the name of human rights. I saw the South African Human Rights Commission, who I cannot even get on a telephone, when I'm struggling with a constituent being thrown off a farm, being robbed of their rights, and being abused by a farmer, when I can't get them on the phone to protect these people. They can stand up and play political charades. Let me tell you what is the impact. Hierdie skole, Afrikaanse skole, want ons het huidiglik in ons gemeenskappe, het ons, soos ek sê, 'n probleem. Ons het 'n probleem in ons landelike gebiede, dat ons kleinskole word toegemaak en kinders word geforseer in die megaskole in. Dit het 'n groot impak op die welstand van kinders. Families word opgebreek, baie families word gedwing om die plaaslewe wat hulle van hou, van nie almal het 'n slegte bestaan op plase nie. Die meeste mense het goeie bestaan op plase. Ek het 'n goeie bestaan op plase gehad. Ek is 'n plaaskind. Baie van mense, hulle is na aan die natuur, hulle wil in die natuur wees. Een van my gemeenskappe as 'n voorbeeld, is daar diep in die Karoo, 'n sekoegat. Daardie gemeenskap woon vir 100 jaar in geslagte. Dis nou die 5de geslag kinders, wat by daai skooltjie is, was toegemaak. En daai kinders is weggeneem na skole op dorpe soos Beaufort. Dit is Afrikaanse mense. Wanneer jy praat oor Afrikaanse taalbeleid, meneer Lesofie, praat jy nie net van Afrikaanse wit mens nie. Dit is breër as dit. Jy praat van 'n kultuurgroep mense in Suid-Afrika, so divers. Dit is die kleerlingkooi, dit is die wit Suid-Afrikaner, wat ook al. Maar jy praat nie net van een groepering mense nie. It is the total blindness of these people that makes you, it's vomit-inducing, to the point that you want to say the next 4 years cannot pass fast enough for us to just get it right, to mobilize a vote to get these clowns out of office. When the president excluded my community, toe hy hulle van die tafel, hulle het nie eens genoem by die tafel nie, hulle was nie eens genooi na die tafel nie, en die party, die minister, en dit is ook die ironie van dit alles, is dat juist hierdie minister, Guyton McKenzie, het sport, kuns en kultuur as deel van sy ministry. Dit is sy werk. En sy gemeenskap, sy kultuurgroep word uitgesluit in 'n gesprek rondom Afrikaans en taalbeleid, met wat soveel impak op hulle gaan hê. Want ons skole, ons het te min skole in ons kleerlinggebiede. Ons klasse loop tussen 40 en 60 kinders in 'n klas. It depends in which area you are. But in areas such as the areas that I come from, like in Helderberg, those areas, we have children, 60 kids in a class. So as jy as jy daai skole wat al reeds oorvol is, as jy dit dan nou gaan verander in 'n dual medium, beteken dit, wat gaan word van in daai gemeenskappe wat oorvol is, ons het kinders wat uitval, uit skool uitval, veral in hulle eerste hoërskoolfase, laat primêre fase, wat gaan gebeur? Die probleem word vererger, en dit is hoekom ons sê, dat die krisis, BELA, spraak nie tot die krisis nie. Mense, ek wil amper tot op die berge staan om te skree vir mense, om te sê, die gesprekke wat huidiglik gevoer word, of die diskos rondom hierdie wetgewing, is totally van koers af. Dat is net, there's only one thing you need to ask, and I think I've said it a few times now, is does it speak to the crisis? Does it offer the solution? And it does not. But in terms of the issue around equality and inclusivity and the total disregard for the colored Khoi community, that is flagrant disregard. They have not been invited to this table of consultation at all. So when you hear people speak up, dancing up and down, Mr. Lesufi making his grand parade around liberation, what they are failing to notice, either by design or willful ignorance, is that you have excluded a whole group of people while you are speaking on equality, inclusivity, and liberation. You have totally, by definition then, not only excluded them, but you are actually taking away their right to mother tongue education. Ons het 'n lang pad geloop om hierdie wetgewing te staan. En dit is nie 'n groep mense wat dit teëgestaan het nie. Dit is elke Suid-Afrikaner, die meerderheid van hulle wat deelgeneem het aan hierdie publieke verhore, het dit verwerp. Die wetgewing is verwerp gedurende die publiek verhore proses. En niemand kan dit debatteer nie. Tweedens, die proses wat gevolg was, van begin tot einde, was so voetief, dat het onconstitusioneel is, dat het die demokratiese beginsels van betekenisvolle deelname heeltemal geïgnoreer. Nou, wat is die impak wanneer ons praat van moedertaal onderwys en meneer Lesufi se equality, inclusivity en liberation stories, wat gedomineer het die headlines, en ons het letterlik akademici gehad wat agter hulle staan en dit promote. Ek het gepraat rondom dat hierdie wetgewing is top heavy. That is top heavy, it's bigger government. It is actually not giving more money to the crisis on the ground. It gives you more money to keep people in jobs and expand the department. It does not give you money for pit toilets eradication. It doesn't give you more money for teachers. It doesn't give you more money to build new schools. It does none of that. What it is doing is that it is making this big government, which the ANC believes in and are quite incapable and ineffective in, by the way. We know they cannot govern to save themselves. Now, when it comes to what is the impact, ek het met julle gepraat rondom, ek was in recruitment, hoe kinders doen, veral jong mense wanneer hulle klaar is, en hulle gaan op hierdie baie, wat ons noem, fast track, programme binne in organisasies, soos jou groot, jy weet, Fortune 100 companies en dies meer, wanneer hulle hierdie opportunities kry, dat kinders uitval, omdat hulle numerical, verbal en abstract reasoning skills nie up to par is nie. Wat natuurlik wys dat ons onderwyssysteem is van so swak gehalte, dat dit die kinders ontwikkel om krities te dink in hierdie 3 kernaspekte wat vir hulle 'n deur sal oopmaak na 'n baie goeie werk nie. Moedertaalonderwys is bewys as die beste instruksie, of die beste, it's the best language of instruction. Now, as you can hear, I'm going between English and Afrikaans. I'm actually Afrikaans. I grew up Afrikaans. And but my children, I had to send to English schools because I could not get them into the schools in the area where, Afrikaans schools in the area, although I lived within the vicinity. So I'm not blind to the fact that many people experience discrimination on the basis of race, even in the New South Africa, and that language was used many times to keep people out. But when it comes to the decision making around language and admission policies of schools, it is not better for an HOD to do that. It is better for the people closer to the community to make those decisions. And so parents at these schools should make sure that their SGBs are reflective of the demographics in their area, and that those SGBs are going to make the kind of decisions that will be in the best interest of children and in the best interest of their communities. But those kind of conversations around problems in communities where people are struggling to get in to schools, whether it be through discrimination or whatever, those should be had at a community level. We should use that as an opportunity to dialogue around where those problems areas are. But you cannot take away power from parents, SGBs, and centralize it to an HOD, especially if Mr. Lesufi was the HOD. I wouldn't want him to make a decision on school language, because he's quite frankly, in some cases, ignorant to the realities of what we are facing on the ground. And I wouldn't want him, if he was the HOD, to make those decisions. I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't think that he would act in my best interest. As ek 'n kleerling Afrikaanse mens is of 'n wit Afrikaanse mens is, gaan jy so 'n man vertrou om in die best interest to act in your best interest? You wouldn't. The point of the story is, and I think I've labored this point, but so wanneer dit kom by Afrikaanse beleid of moedertaalonderrig, ons weet dat wanneer ons, en hoekom ek juis nou praat rondom die programme waarvan ek eerstehandse kennis het, en hoe kinders in daai programme gefaal het, die psigometriese toetse wat hulle moes ondergaan, juis omdat hulle sukkel met begrip, en hulle nie wiskunde het as 'n hoofvak nie, juis omdat hulle sukkel met begrip. Maar ons weet dat moedertaalonderrig gee aan kinders 'n voorsprong om beter te doen, want wiskunde is 'n begripsvak. Jy moet begrip hê om 'n wiskunde probleem op te los. En hoekom moet ons beklei vir moedertaalonderwys en die reg van marginalized groups? Because for any person marginalized, why we should fight for that is because we know it is in the best interest of the child to be taught in the language of his mother tongue, in his mother tongue. It's the best. BELA does not speak to that. What Mr. Lesufi is actually doing is he's totally ignoring that we need more schools that will be single medium Xhosa or single medium Zulu. We need to keep children as close to their families for as long as possible in rural areas, and keep them because it's good for them. Because it's not just good for them emotionally, it's not just good for them, it's good for them academically to have that support system. But you see, we have a problem. And we have a problem in this, that we actually have a government who focuses on an ideology, or not focus on, first of all, they focus on race as it is their, ek wil amper sê dit is hulle poison. Jy weet in die Kaapse vlakte sê ons, what's your poison? Okay, race is their poison. This is their subject of choice. They will go into obscurity if they didn't focus on the white man problem in South Africa. Everything is the white man. For 30 years, you cannot have that as your go-to answer. We have a problem. Our problem is the policies of the African National Congress now being enforced by the GNU partners, the Democratic Alliance and the Patriotic Alliance, I'm singling out because of the issue around the exclusion of the colored Khoi community when it came to the consultations on clauses 4 and 5. We cannot have, nothing fixes bad policy. You can put Miss Piggy in a designer dress. You can give her some earrings. She remains a pig. You can dress BELA up as redress and liberation. It is flawed policy that does not address the crisis on the ground or provide the solution that we need. We need an education act that is broad, that will include independent alternative education, will include online schools, will include your cottage schools, your tutor centers. That's what we need. BELA does not do that. Why do we say that the BELA is more state control in education? I listened to an academic go to town explaining on how people are misinformed on BELA. The people that are rejecting this are the parents, the teachers, the activists that are dealing with education every day and that are experiencing it at the coalface. Not some academic in some lecture room, in some university. No, we are speaking to people, in the public hearings, the people that came and showed up, rejected it, were the people with reasons and with solutions. They rejected it. And they presented to the committee what those solutions would be. Those were activists, they were educators, they were parents and children. And they had reasons for that. Now let's look at our memorandum and what it contains. The key issues that we highlight in our memorandum, and you may have seen it on change.org. If you haven't signed it, you can still sign it today. I know that the Pestalozzi Trust also ran a petition. I'm not sure if Philip Rosenthal did, but all in all, the petitions are coming to about 8,000 people have signed our petition that endorses our memorandum and our demands and our concerns as were highlighted, as I'm going to give it to you now. The key issues that we highlighted were the exclusion of key stakeholders, Afrikaans-speaking colored communities, homeschoolers, faith-based organizations, rural communities, and innovative education providers that were excluded by the president in his consultation of this 3-month consultation period on discussions aimed of improving the bill. I should also add the fact that the president also focused solely on those 4 and 5 clauses, for me is problematic because it speaks to me that the president were moved by the arguments of only Solidariteit. That is, and I have no problem. I see Solidariteit as a great organization and as a partner in the fight for reform in education. I must state that. But it is a problem because Solidariteit is one of the best run civil organizations. There are many other voices that are not as empowered as Solidariteit, and for the fact that the president then excludes my community, for me speaks, and this is the wrong that I'm emphasizing, because you basically then just deferring to a class of people, not a race. A class of people that has the power to take you to court. And it's my problem as well with clause 25. And it has been my argument as well, is that it is the rural communities affected by language policy and the closure of their schools. Language policy in terms of Afrikaans and the closing of their schools, their small schools, that does not have the money to take government to court. And the president emphasizes, actually, he disenfranchises them again. And marginalizes them again. And this is for me the whole thing around people speaking on rights, the Human Rights Commission endorsing this. It's totally lost on me that they cannot see that the people affected by this exclusion are the most vulnerable. And when it comes to Afrikaans, that there is a whole cultural group of people, my people, that has been excluded and once again being disenfranchised. and I could have thrown around the R word. I'm not. I'm going to be nice. I should not be. We spoke around the failure, the concern. Another concern is the failure to address the education crisis. I've spoken at length on that. I don't think I should add more. The restoration of parental rights, the lack of meaningful public participation, I spoke on that. Systemic inefficiency, and systemic inefficiency in this way. We currently have a deficit in the education budget over the next term. So much so that we know the Western Cape, being one of the more efficient provinces, already has been transparent in saying that they will have to let teachers go. So we know there's not enough money. And the BELA Act does not address those concerns. I've told you that the BELA Act actually will give more bureaucrats jobs, and that the money will not go to the ground. And this is one of the problems. But the second problem around systemic inefficiencies is that we have programs within the Department of Education that are not effective, one of them being comprehensive sexuality education, that has been proven by their own research that it does not change behavior. It has not resulted in the outcomes of reduced sexual activity, and that it is proven in research and in the occurrence of sexually transmitted infections in learners. So we know that their program is not working, but that program has been kept on as if it is the answer for everything in terms of teenage pregnancies. We know it's not, because their research proves it to us. I'll make a video on that separately with Philip Rosenthal, who's one of the people that I highly respect in terms of arguing the case against comprehensive sexuality education. So what are our demands? So because the bill fails to address the real challenges facing the education system and will exasperate, I said it, the inequalities, it is rife with flaws. I said to you, it has become a football. That one, we want the bill to be rejected in its current form. Those are our demands. Second, that the president must study the submissions and respond. The president has received detailed submissions on the flaws. He received a detailed submission from myself, and I know other civil organizations did the same, to outlay what are the flaws. And we would like the president to go through them and to consider that and respond to us in time. And not to commence the bill, not to enact it until he has gone through these submissions. And for him to engage openly with all stakeholders, to include all Afrikaans speakers, especially those in the colored community, into deliberations on language and in submission policy, to include representatives from the embarrassingly few exclusively Black African indigenous schools. Jy kan mense sommige kere, jy weet, my ma het gesê dat daar is sekere goed wat jy nie kan fix nie. Jy moet sommer iemand 'n goeie pakslaag gee. Nou, hierdie is een van hulle. Ek het met jou gepraat rondom die feit, I spoke around the issue of mother tongue education, the importance of it, how the outcomes look like, because and what the results are, or the proven poor outcomes of our education, especially where mother tongue instruction is not available. There are so little Xhosa single schools, Zulu schools. No one is speaking on it. No one. It is embarrassing that we are speaking on rights and the protection of cultural rights, but specifically, and we do not address the fact that there is not the promotion of mother tongue education through building schools that are solely focused on the Xhosa or the Zulu language, that we're not actually adding more. But we are This is for me the embarrassing thing around this conversation is that we're having people shouting colonialism and yet fighting for English schools, more English to be added, but not for their mother tongue, not for Xhosa, not for Pedi, not for Zulu, not for. Do you understand? It is ludicrous. We are being led by the clowns, right? We are being led by people who truly, when you insult people, Mr. Lesufi, you must expect a reaction back because you truly insulted every single South African who rejected this bill, this act. They rejected it not because they're racist. I'm sure there are people who are racist, but I can promise you the constituency that I serve, that form part of homeschoolers, public schooling parents, they are protecting the right, their parental right to educate, to decide the education of their children, most of them because they see the poor outcome in the public schooling system. And also because they know if they forego their right as parents and give the state this power, that it is for them in principle, it is a godly principle for them, that they stand by and that I stand by, that we as parents are the final authority in the lives of our children and the primary caregiver. And every single, the Constitution of South Africa, we called for an amendment. I called while I was in office. But every international law and treaty underlines the role of parents. We should not be fighting for our right. It should be strengthened by the state. The state should strengthen parents who are taking up the responsibility for the education of their children. It is the answer to an improved South Africa. It is the answer. More people taking individual responsibility. I don't even want to touch on the issue of, one of the problems we have, and I'm going to throw it in there, is that we have politicians, a lot of politicians, and I know, who thinks nothing of fathering children and leaving them behind. We have a lot of leaders who are not faithful, and because they are not faithful to the vows that they hold, they have a disrespect for the family unit. They will not protect it. But the key for us is to protect the family unit. We need to protect parental rights. And for the state, if you want to take the burden off the state, you protect family. Because a child within a family unit has a better chance of not getting involved in gangsterism, in drugs, where there are both parents involved. We should strive for that ideal, and the state should actually applaud parents who fight for their rights as a parent to teach their children, not undermine it. What I've seen and heard is academics undermine parents who are fighting for the rights of their children. It's not people don't want to. There is a minority of people that are still trying to keep schools white. A minority of people, I promise you. South Africa has marched on from that reality ages ago, hey. We have marched on from that. We are at the place now where we want effective governance. We want our schools to be functional. We want our areas and our communities to be safe, right? We want to have a viable economy. We want good jobs. We want good policies that will strengthen small businesses. We don't want this nonsense. We are so sick and tired. People are tired of the ruling class imposing a reality on them that is not the reality on the ground. I don't see the fringes of people that are staying op die plotte en wil 'n staat vir homself bou. Want dit is die prentjie wat meneer Lesufi hulle skep. Jy weet, homeschoolers is mense wat hier iewers op die plotte bly, wat net hulle kinders vir hulle, and yes, possibly there are people like that. But the majority of people are actually doing it because it's in the best interest of their child. And I'm a homeschooling mom. Look at me, black like me. Homeschooling. The homeschooling community is as diverse as they come. In the Western Cape, the majority of homeschoolers are colored, Muslim, or like me. Anyway, so to scrap and this is important, to scrap the policy on the management of learner pregnancy, CSE, and gender ideology. To redevelop the policy on the management of learner pregnancy with wide public consultation and limited to ensure pregnant girls receive an education. It is important for me to highlight that. There is no parent, all parents rejected the bill on the basis of the broad powers that it gave the minister to make regulations on learner pregnancy. Because parents do not want this policy to become the law. And we're asking the minister that a national task team be put together of including the faith community and specifically the charismatic Pentecostal evangelical sector of the church to be included in the discussions on in the national task team when regulations are discussed, but that in its current form that this policy not be included and not be made, that the minister not issue regulations in line with this policy, but rather put together a national task team that includes faith leaders from as well that includes the charismatic Pentecostal. To redevelop CSE in consultation with parents, communities, and faith leaders, and include an opt-out provisions. The minister, the previous minister, made that promise to parents and gave that option to schools, and we want it now to be put in writing, that there is an opt-out provision should the state continue with CSE, the failed CSE program. To address core issues in the education crisis and take decisive action on school violence, overcrowding, under-resourced schools, the not fit for purpose curriculum, and corruption. Moratorium on school closures, particularly in our rural areas, the moratorium on the freezing and elimination of posts. And to create an independent panel of private sector experts with no ties to educational institutions to assess and make recommendations to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the basic education system. The panel, and you can go to change.org. I would advise you go on to change.org, read through, sign. I know that I've been all over the place a little bit with the video, maybe a lot. But I wanted to speak really to the noise. It was important for me to answer people like the Lesufis and these people, to answer them on what is at the heart of the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act. It's not that people are just willy-nilly not wanting it. No, it is what is at the heart. At the heart of it is that it doesn't speak to the crises, does not provide the solutions, and it does not speak to the challenges that we are facing. The BELA Act is more failed policy by the ANC and now supported by the GNU. Failed policy based on ideology where family is not at the core of their focus in terms of policy. And I've said a little bit about why it is important. We really need family to become strengthened, for families for policies that are family oriented and family focused. Why? Because it will have better outcomes for our children. It will change and transform our nation. The state should enable that. They should enable and strengthen family as a foundation for children, healthy children. So when you see the state take away more powers from parents and take more control, what you are seeing is the undermining of parental rights and the weakening of the family structure. And this inevitably lead to further destruction of our society. The BELA Act falls within that trap. It falls more into the policy directions and legislative direction of the government, which moves more and more away from community-based or community-focused policy, family-oriented policy, and individual responsibility, where people take responsibility for their own lives and the state just provides them with the resources or enable them to live a life that will, contribute to society. So this is where we're at. Marie Sukers, Voice to Parliament.